Week 16 of the fantasy football season, and here's quarterback start sits every matchup this week. The first one, Thursday Night Football. New Orleans Saints at the Los Angeles Rams. So Derek Carr's been an up and down first season for him with this New Orleans Saints team. And this week, a middle of the pack matchup at the Rams, where we know Thursday Night Football usually are high scoring games. But right now, this New Orleans Saints offense really isn't moving the football consistently week in and week out. Chris Olave, he missed last week's game, even though Derek Carr went out there and put in a solid performance. But this week, I don't think Carr does much in this ball game, and this Ram team's been playing better as well over the last few weeks. Matthew Stafford's a start for me. When you get guys like Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp in that starting lineup, those are great weapons on the offense, and Kyren Williams has opened the whole offense up as well since he returned from injury. So Matthew Stafford on a great stretch over the last few weeks. He's putting up at least 20 or more fantasy points the last 3 weeks in a row, and this week versus a middle of the pack type of Saint defense, and usually Thursday Night Football games are high scoring. Matthew Stafford is a start for me this week. The next game, Saturday, once again, Cincinnati Bengals at the Pittsburgh Steelers. Jake Browning, he's filled in perfectly for Joe Burrow over the last few weeks. I know Jamar Chase, he's banged up. He's day-to-day with the shoulder injury right now. But even if he don't play, I think Jake Browning could make some things happen. And we saw Gardner Minshew last week, even with Michael Pittman out half of that game, have a good one versus this defense. So Jake Browning's confident. He's got a chip on his shoulder, and this Bengal team's won 3 ball games in a row. And once again, I'll give Browning the start. Mason Rudolph, he was named the starting quarterback for this Pittsburgh Steelers team. And obviously, it doesn't matter who the quarterback is for this Steelers team. These guys are not getting the job done. And especially in playoff matchups right now for fantasy owners, there's no way to have confidence in Rudolph. So he's a sit. Buffalo Bills at the Chargers Saturday night ball game. Josh Allen, he's a start each and every week. I know last week he didn't do much, but it was the James Cook show versus the Dallas Cowboys where he ran wild and Allen just had to throw the football 15 times in that game, and they got the easy victory. But this week at the Chargers, a defense that's gotten torched all season by quarterbacks, and we even saw Aidan O'Connell last week put up 30-plus fantasy points. Josh Allen, a start each and every week. Easton Stick, he's a sit for me. I know Stick had some garbage time and actually finished the day with a decent fantasy day and almost passing for 300 yards. But this week versus a Buffalo defense that's starting to figure things out, even though they've had a bunch of injuries this season. Easton Stick is not a quarterback anyone would have interest in or confidence to start this week. Seattle Seahawks at the Tennessee Titans. If it's Geno Smith or Drew Lock, I don't think any of these quarterbacks really have fantasy appeal. We know Geno Smith, even if he does start in this game, he's not 100% with the shoulder injury he sustained a few weeks ago. Smith is a sit. Drew Lock, he's filled in the last few weeks, but he really hasn't done much for the Seattle team. And I know on paper it's a pretty decent matchup at the Tennessee Titans, but like I said, with some other quarterbacks in a crucial week for fantasy owners, there's no way to have any confidence in a Seattle quarterback, even though obviously they have great weapons like a DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett, Kenneth Walker, and Charbonnet out of the backfield. Now to the Titans, Will Levis, he's banged up with ankle injuries. We don't know if he's going to play in this game, but Will Levis, he really hasn't had fantasy days except 1 or 2 good games since he's been named the starter over the last couple months. So he's a sit. Ryan Tannehill is sit if he's going to start in this game. We haven't seen much from Tannehill over the last couple seasons. I know these quarterbacks, it's not 100% their fault that they're behind one of the worst offensive lines in the league, but they still have decent weapons on the offense. DeAndre Hopkins, Derrick Henry, Chigga Kwango, Traylon Burks, who's actually done nothing once again this season. And these guys are sits. Indianapolis Colts at the Atlanta Falcons. Gardner Minshew, he's a start for me in this one. So Gardner Minshew, believe it or not, this season he's gone out there and he's put up some decent fantasy days. And we know he's a gunslinger. We know he's going to turn the football over at times. But also we know he's been putting up fantasy points this season. Here's Gardner Minshew. So this week in a plus matchup at Atlanta, an indoor game, which is always a nice thing as well for quarterbacks, or even any player. He's a start. Desmond Ridder, one of the worst quarterbacks in the league. He's been a turnover machine and a guy who really don't put up yards or much for fantasy owners. I know the weapons on offense aren't all that great, but when you can't consistently get the ball to guys like Drake London and a Kyle Pitts, you're not really that good of a quarterback. And once again, Desmond Ridder, a sit. Cleveland Browns at the Houston Texans. Joe Flacco, a borderline option. So Flacco's starting 3 games in a row now for this Brown team, and obviously the starter of the remainder of the season. And he has a good rapport with Amari Cooper. David Njoku's had 2 great games out of the 3 that Flacco started. But this week it's tough in a playoff matchup for fantasy owners to have 100% confidence in Flacco. So this week, even with those great weapons and guys producing in a good matchup, he's a borderline option. Now to the Texans, if Stroud starts, even in a tough matchup versus the Browns, at one of the better defenses in the league, I got confidence that Stroud could go out there and put up fantasy points. We know he's one of the better rookie quarterbacks to come out over the last few seasons in the NFL draft. And CJ Stroud, even with limited weapons, I think he can make things happen. And as a start this week, Case Keenum, if he's starting once again, if Stroud's not ready to come back off the concussion, he's not a quarterback I have any interest in. I know he had a decent ball game and they came back and beat Tennessee, which was a nice victory to keep their playoff chances alive for Houston. But Case Keenum, in terms of fantasy football, doesn't have value. Green Bay Packers at the Carolina Panthers. Jordan Love, he's a start for me. So Jordan Love this season, he's been a solid quarterback where, pretty much you could pencil him in 20-plus fantasy points weekly. And this week in the middle of the pack matchup, believe it or not, at the Carolina Panthers, where their defense is bad versus the run, but versus passing and receivers, this D's actually been halfway decent. But I still have confidence in Jordan Love. He's got good weapons. We'll see if Christian Watson can come back. You got Jaden Reed, Romeo Doubs, Detarian Wicks, who's come around over the last few weeks. So he's got guys to spread the ball out. Tucker Kraft as well in this offense. And this week at Carolina, I think he gets enough of the job done to be a startable option. Bryce Young is it. It's been a tough rookie season for the number one pick, Bryce Young. And a lot of people already going out there saying he's a bust, but obviously way too early in his NFL career here for Bryce Young to label him a bust right away. But like I said, when you got guys like Adam Thielen, Jonathan Mingo, DJ Chark, not much to throw to, it's tough to put up consistent fantasy numbers. So he's a sit once again. Commanders at the New York Jets. Sam Howell, one of the worst games of the year he had, believe it or not, last week at the Los Angeles Rams. But Sam Howell, still one of the better quarterbacks in fantasy football. He's in the top 12 in fantasy points at the position. But this week in a tough matchup at a New York Jet defense that I still think is one of the better defenses in the league, he's a borderline option to me, even though Terry McLaurin and Howell finally got on the same page in last week's game. Now to the Jets, we don't know if it's going to be Zach Wilson, Trevor Siemian, or Aaron Rodgers, but I don't have interest in any of these guys to start this week. I know it's a great matchup versus the Commanders at one of the worst defenses in the league, but Trevor Siemian, he's been a quarterback that's bounced around throughout his NFL career. He's not really getting the job done in the games we've seen him throughout. Zach Wilson, he's been the starter majority of the season besides 2 games that Tim Boyle started, and he just didn't get the job done at all except one game versus the Texans a couple weeks ago. And Aaron Rodgers, if he does come back miraculously, coming off that Achilles tear, it's a great story, no doubt about it, but I don't know if I could really trust Rodgers coming off a major injury like that, in an injury that usually takes 9 months to recover and come back from, and come back in 3-4 months. Here's Rodgers. If he starts, great for Rodgers, no doubt about it, but in terms of fantasy football, there's no way I could have trust he could go out there and put in a good performance. Division matchup, Detroit Lions at the Minnesota Vikings. So Jared Goff coming off a monster ball game, and Goff, I know he's a better quarterback at home than he is on the road, but this week a good matchup with the Minnesota Vikings, where their defense is a middle of the pack defense, and a defense we know shut down the Raiders, but then last week Cincinnati Bengals came back and beat them in that ball game. So Jared Goff with good weapons like Amon-Ra St. Brown, Sam Laporta, Jameson Williams, Josh Reynolds starting to come around here for this team. He's a start for me. Nick Mullins a sit. Nick Mullins last week, he was a gamer. He fought it through. Good weapons. Him and Jordan Addison had a good report. Justin Jefferson back in the lineup. Ty Chandler, TJ Hawkinson. So a good offense, no doubt about it, for this Minnesota Viking team. But this week here versus the Lions, it's a matchup that's good on paper, but still Nick Mullins in a playoff spot for fantasy owners is definitely tough to trust Jacksonville Jaguars at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So Trevor Lawrence, he's in concussion protocol right now. We don't know if he's going to play or not. And Lawrence, he's had some good games over the last few weeks. Besides last week versus a tough Raven defense, he didn't put up fantasy numbers. But this week, Trevor Lawrence, if he does play and he overcomes the concussion, he's a start. If Beathard's the starter, obviously no fantasy owner is going to have confidence in a career backup quarterback in C.J. Beathard to go out there and put up fantasy points. So he's a sit. Baker Mayfield, believe it or not, he's been a top 15 quarterback all season at the position. And last week, what a game it was for Baker, over 35 fantasy points. So this week here in a pretty decent matchup versus the Jacksonville Jaguars, I would have confidence in Baker Mayfield. You got great weapons, Mike Evans, Chris Godwin finally having the breakout game last week. Rashad White, one of the best receiving backs out of the backfield. So this week, Baker Mayfield, I would have confidence and give him the nod. Arizona Cardinals at the Chicago Bears. Kyler Murray, it's been an up and down return for him off the ACL. And obviously it takes months for players to get their legs under them in the NFL and be fully recovered from their injuries. But Kyler Murray, him and Trey McBride are doing good things. James Conner's been running well over the last few weeks, and this is a good matchup out of Chicago Bear defense that really can't stop anyone. And we saw last week, this Bear team was up 17-7 late in the third quarter, and they blew the ball game and they lost. So right now, this week, Kyler Murray, I think, could put up some decent numbers for fantasy owners. Now, Justin Fields, he's a borderline option. I mean, Fields, we know he's a running quarterback. We know he can make some plays happen like some other quarterbacks can, and he's got great athleticism, no doubt about it. But in a tough playoff spot, even though I know it's a good matchup on paper versus the Arizona Cardinals, I think he's a borderline option is Justin Fields. I don't know what you're going to get from Justin Fields. Some weeks it's 20 points, some weeks it's 10 points, and then some weeks we've seen the 40-point game. So this week versus Arizona and a mixed bag of results type of season for Fields, he's a borderline option to me. Dallas Cowboys at the Miami Dolphins. So the Cowboys coming off a game where they got destroyed at the Buffalo Bills last week. And Dak Prescott, he didn't do anything for fantasy owners. But this week, I think this Cowboy team is going to put points on the board. I'm not saying they're going into Miami and winning the ball game as Dallas. But Dak Prescott, when you got guys like CeeDee Lamb, Jake Ferguson, Brandon Cooks, and Tony Pollard out of the backfield, I think it's hard to hold them down 2 weeks in a row. We're really not doing anything. So after a horrible game last week, I think Dak Prescott and this Cowboy team could go in there and put up some points. He's a start. He's a start each and every week. I know last week only 17 fantasy points without Tyreek Hill, but I believe he'll return in this game, getting that extra week off, coming off that ankle. And it was a short week from that Monday night game where he got banged up versus Tennessee, and then going into that Jet game on Sunday. So I think Tyreek Hill's back, and that obviously bodes well for Tua, and he's a start Sunday Night Football, New England Patriots at the Denver Broncos. So Bailey Zapp, he's definitely played better football than Mac Jones, but that's not saying much in my opinion. So Zapp's getting Hunter Henry in the mix. Devontae Parker in last week's game had a good ball game, but Zapp in a matchup at Denver where their defense has definitely improved besides last week giving up 42 points to the Lions. He's still not a quarterback I could trust in fantasy football, so he's a sit. Russell Wilson, a borderline option. Definitely a way better year in the Sean Payton offense than it was last season for Russell Wilson, where he just couldn't get anything going in Nathaniel Hackett's offense. So this year, he's making his checkdowns. He's running the football when it's necessary. And him and Courtland Sutton definitely have a good rapport. So this week, he's a borderline option because I still think this Patriot defense did a decent job in last week's game versus Patrick Mahomes. And this week versus Russell Wilson, they could do a decent job as well. So on Monday Night Football, first of 3 games, Las Vegas Raiders at the Kansas City Chiefs. So Aiden O'Connell, best game of his career, no doubt about it, last week in that blowout victory, 63-21 versus the Chargers. But this week at a good defense and division matchup at the Kansas City Chiefs. I don't see Aiden O'Connell doing much in this one. This Chief defense, one of the better units, believe it or not, in all pro football. And this week I don't see this Raided team really moving the football at all, even though last week, like I said, 63 points. But the week before that, no points. So this offense is hit or miss weekly, and this week it's going to be a miss on the road. And he's a sit. Patrick Mahomes, obviously a start each and every week. I know Mahomes, he really only had one huge game all season, but weekly he's still putting up top 5 numbers for fantasy owners. So this week in a matchup versus a middle-of-the-pack type of Raided defense and a team that he's owned throughout his career, he's obviously a start. New York Giants at the Philadelphia Eagles. Tommy DeVito, a sit for me. Tommy DeVito, we know he's trying. We know he's going out there, and he's giving this Giant team the best chance of winning all season compared to Tyrod Taylor and Daniel Jones, who's obviously out for the year with the torn ACL. But this week here versus an Eagle defense that obviously made a few changes in personnel and coaching, I think it's going to be a tough day for Tommy DeVito. He didn't fare well in last week's game at the New Orleans Saints. And this week on the road at Philadelphia, hostile environment and behind a pretty weak offensive line, he's a sit. Jalen Hurts obviously a start each and every week. It doesn't matter if Hurts has a couple bad games here and there. He's still a quarterback that has potential weekly to put up the top numbers. And this week, in a matchup versus the Giants, Jalen Hurts has had big games throughout his career. Once again, second game on Monday, he goes out there and has a good game. In the final game of the week, could be a Super Bowl matchup potentially. Baltimore Ravens at the San Francisco 49ers. So both these quarterbacks, they're in the MVP running. They put up numbers weekly. Lamar Jackson, a great game last week at Jacksonville, making some great run plays and then turning runs into big throws out of the pocket. So this week, even in a tough matchup at the Niners, a defense that's definitely been locked in over the last few weeks. Lamar, is a start each and every week. And Brock Purdy, what a year it's been for him. I know it's scheme. I know it's the great playmakers, Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk, Christian McCaffrey, George Kittle on this offense. But this week here, one of the tougher tests of the year versus a great stout defense of the Ravens. I still think Brock Purdy could go out there and put up numbers. So that's quarterback start sits every matchup for Week 16 of the fantasy football season.